the impact of tithing. We continue the study on stewardship, motives of the heart.
And last week we have opened the conversation on the topic of tithing. We talked more about its spiritual implications. This week, though, we're looking at its impact. What is the impact of tithing and what is the method of its distribution?
Let's see. There is this perception that tithing is business for organized religion. But the study is helping us look for some biblical perspective and guidance.
And right from the beginning, we learn from the lesson that the purpose of tithing is to fund God's mission here on earth. In other words, this is the main source of funds that make the organized spreading of the gospel work. In the Old Testament, it was the Levites who carried the organized mission of God. And they were supported by that same 10% system as we use today.
Our personal experience with God is something very powerful, but it's not to remain only personal. Jesus wants us to be involved in the struggles of this world and to be spreading the good news, to bring the testimony about Him everywhere. We are part of society. We live in communities, and this involves some organization, administration, development, and strategizing initiatives that are funded through this tithing method. As the lesson formulates it, together we fund the mission.
God Himself says, "Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse. Test me in this, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that there will be no room enough left to store it." The instruction by God to bring our tithes comes also with the promise of blessing, a promise of blessing that even supersedes our expectations. The lesson makes a point, though, that we're not talking here about the prosperity gospel, as some pastors preach. Moreover, God knows very well our need, and He supplies accordingly, in a material sense, but also spiritually.
It's disappointing that it's not a bring more, take more scheme. It can market a good Ponzi scheme, though. The relationship with God is powerful because it doesn't depend on our resources. It's not about what we can do and bring, but about what He can do with what we have, with what we bring to Him. God is eager to take the challenge and to show us whole new dimensions. Try me on this, He says.
Another big principle of tithe distribution is discussed in the lesson. Where should the tithe go? Who will collect those funds? The Levite system, as well the church, our church, chose the so-called principle of storehouse. According to that system, the tithe was collected and ended up in the storehouse of the temple in Jerusalem, and respectively today, it goes to the local conference of the churches that we visit. From there, the funds are distributed accordingly to pastors and churches to carry on their missions. This was God's instruction of how things worked in the Old Testament.
The author says God creates and operates in systems. He has designed the solar systems, ecosystems, digestive systems, nervous systems, and many more. One of them is the tithing system, and it has a purpose. Then the lesson cites Ellen White writing, "The tithe is set apart for special use. It is not to be regarded as a poor fund. It is to be especially devoted to the support of those who are bearing God's message to the world, and it should not be diverted from this purpose."
The lesson ends on a very interesting note by comparing tithing with salvation by faith. We studied the whole last quarter the book or the letter to the Romans, and it doesn't come as a surprise to us that giving our tithes does not earn us a bit of salvation or any forgiveness, period. However, giving our tithe reveals how do we stand in our faith with God. It also reveals that we recognize Him as a creator and sustainer and our Savior. So in conclusion, we can ask ourselves the question, what will happen if all Christians don't give their tithe back to God? What will be the impact? And on the contrary, we could ask ourselves the question, what will happen if all Christians do give their tithe back to God? What will the impact be then?
It's a challenging but exciting and rewarding experience to grow and to learn to be a steward of God. Next week, the lesson is offerings of gratitude.